They didn't believe me not until I played the tape, not when I filed complaints, not when I showed them emails, not when I cried in private holding my breath so no one would hear me. But when I clicked play, when his voice filled the conference room word for word, they finally listened, and by then it was too late to undo what he'd said. Let me take you back 6 weeks. 6 weeks before the audio, before the fallout, before HR scrambled like their desks were on fire. His name was Ryan. He was new mid-30s, confident, always in the center of attention. He wore power like cologne strong, overwhelming, the kind that lingers even after he's gone, and he made it clear from the moment he shook my hand that I didn't fit. "You've been here a while, right?" he said. "During our first one-on-one, it's good to have legacy people around. For stability, legacy. Like a couch you keep because it matches the carpet." At first, it was subtle eye rolls when I spoke, laughs when I presented ideas, jokes about my work mom energy. The first time I brought it to HR, I didn't expect fireworks, just a record, a note, a conversation. Instead, I got a 15-minute Zoom call with someone from employee relations who ended it with, "I'm sure it wasn't meant that way." I hung up and stared at the wall for a long time. Then I did what I always do. I went back to work. But it didn't stop. It escalated. He started assigning my projects to people half my age, then asking me to supervise them like some kind of glorified babysitter. He mocked my email style in front of the team, told a junior associate I was great at proofreading, and suggested I mentor the creatives, not lead them. And every time I said something, I got the same line from HR: "We'll keep an eye on it." But they never did, so I did something they didn't expect. I bought a recorder. Not some spy gadget, just a little USB thing that clipped to the inside of my notebook. I never told anyone. I didn't have to. I wasn't out to destroy anyone. I just needed to prove what they refused to see. As the first time I used it was in a planning meeting. Ryan was late. Again, when he walked in, he glanced at my notes and said, "You always come prepared. That's why we love the over 40 crowd, never short on ink or opinions." The room laughed. I didn't, but my recorder was on. That night I listened to it over and over, his tone, the way the others laughed uncomfortably but still laughed. It wasn't the worst thing he said, not by far, but it was enough to start the file. I is scoring, so over the next 2 weeks I built a collection, his comments, his smirks. The way he said "you people" when referring to women in senior positions. The time he joked about early retirement and said, "Wouldn't you rather be baking cookies than building slide decks?" Every time I stayed calm, every time I pressed record, it felt strange carrying proof in my pocket while they still told me I was overreacting, but I knew the day would come. And it did. In a meeting about next quarter's budget, I suggested we revisit the proposal format to make room for team feedback. Ryan leaned back, smiled, and said loudly, "There she goes again, trying to organize us like her recipe box." I looked around. The team shifted in their seats. No one laughed this time. Later that afternoon, I uploaded the file to a secure drive. Then I printed a transcript. And finally, after months of being dismissed, I walked back into HR. But this time I didn't bring emotion. I brought evidence. I walked into that HR office thinking I finally had the upper hand. I had the recording, I had the transcript, I had months of being gaslit boiled down to one simple truth. It wasn't in my head. It was on tape. Sandra from HR greeted me with a polite smile, the kind people wear when they're trying to stay neutral in a storm. "Have a seat, Dana," she said, gesturing to the same chair I'd sat in weeks ago when they told me Ryan was just joking. But this time I didn't sit, hunched or hesitant. I placed the folder on the table and beside it the recorder. She looked at them like they were ticking bombs. "This is a transcript," I said calmly, "of the last 3 weeks. And this," I tapped the device, "is everything I've endured while you did nothing." She blinked. I could see her HR mask crack just slightly. "Dana," she began, choosing her words like they might explode. "I need to remind you that recording conversations at work without consent can violate company policy." I didn't flinch. "And I need to remind you that ignoring repeated harassment complaints can violate federal law." We stared at each other in silence. Then she reached for the folder. 3 days passed. No emails, no meetings, no updates, just silence, until Friday at 4:48 p.m., because HR always drops bombs right before the weekend. Subject notice of performance review, escalation from employee relations. They didn't mention the recordings. They didn't mention Ryan. Instead, they said I was being placed on a behavioral improvement track due to concerns over disruptive conduct and team morale. In other words, I had officially been labeled the problem. I stared at the email for a long time. It wasn't rage I felt, not shock, just a strange, quiet clarity, like realizing a friend you've defended for years has been gossiping about you all along. I had played by every rule, reported through the right channels, stayed professional, never raised my voice, and now I was being punished for speaking up too clearly. The following Monday, Ryan strolled past my desk like nothing had happened. "Hey, Dana," he said with a smug grin. Tough week, I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because in my purse, next to my wallet and keys, sat a copy of every recording. And in my inbox, a draft email addressed to an employment lawyer I'd found the night I got that HR notice. Her tagline said, "I represent people who followed the rules and got burned anyway." So you mean I scheduled a consultation. She listened quietly, professionally. Then she leaned forward and said, "Let me guess he's being protected because he gets results." I nodded, "And they think you'll quit quietly before things get ugly." I nodded again. "Well," she said, "let's make this ugly but legal." We started building a case. Discrimination, retaliation, hostile work environment. Each recording became a puzzle piece. Each HR email, a breadcrumb of neglect. And then I got another email, this time from Sandra, subject, immediate HR follow-up requested. They wanted to meet again, this time with legal on the call. The day before the meeting, Ryan stopped by my cubicle. He leaned against the divider like he owned the place. "You know, Dana," he said, "maybe you should think about how you want to be remembered here." I smiled, because I knew exactly how I'd be remembered, as the woman who pressed record and never pressed stop. The moment I walked into the HR conference room, I knew they weren't expecting me to be calm. They expected me to be nervous, defensive, maybe even desperate. Instead, I was silent, steady, prepared. Because I already knew what they were going to say, and more importantly, I knew what they didn't know. I had correlating. There were 3 people at the table this time. Sandra from HR, a company attorney in a navy suit, and someone from internal compliance I had never met before. No Ryan. Of course not. The man who created the fire never shows up to watch the house burn. Sandra began reading from a carefully worded document full of phrases like ongoing concern, workplace disruption, and reputation risk. I listened, expressionless. Then the lawyer cleared his throat. "Dana, we're considering a termination with cause. However, the company is willing to offer a severance package to allow for a professional departure." That was the moment they tried to buy my silence. The moment they thought I'd fold like so many others had. I leaned forward, pulled out a USB drive, and placed it on the table. This, I said, contains 37 audio files, 14 email threads, and documentation of every HR conversation I've had over the past 3 months. I saw Sandra shift in her chair. I turned to the lawyer. "If this company wants to end my employment, fine. But let's not pretend this is a professional departure. Let's call it what it is, retaliation." The silence that followed was deafening. "To you recorded conversations," the compliance rep finally asked. I documented everything I said, because every time I reported harassment, you labeled it a misunderstanding. Every time I came to you with facts, you handed me gaslight in return. I paused. "I don't want your severance. I want accountability." The meeting ended without a signature, without a deal, without a handshake. And the next morning, something unexpected happened. 2 emails appeared in my inbox, both from women. Both subject lines read, "I have something to say." Turns out I wasn't the only one Ryan had targeted, just the only one who stayed long enough and brave enough to keep receipts. Within 48 hours, 3 more women reached out. One of them had already quit the company. Another said she'd spoken up before but was told she was overreacting. Sound familiar? A week later, I received a letter. The company was launching an independent investigation into workplace harassment claims. Ryan was placed on leave. Sandra was reassigned to a non-employee facing position, and me, I was offered my job back with a promotion. I declined. Stir Tom Breen, because here's the thing about finally being heard. Once the silence breaks, you stop settling for rooms that once ignored you. I took those recordings, that folder, that hard-earned pain, and I turned it into something better. I joined a nonprofit that protects women in corporate spaces. I started speaking on panels. I mentored younger professionals on how to stand firm, speak up, and document everything. And every time someone says, "I don't think they'll believe me," I hand them a pen and say, "Start writing it down." They may ignore your voice, but they can't erase your evidence. They say truth always finds a way, but what they don't say is how long it takes, how much it costs, or how lonely the wait can be. When HR dismissed my complaints and painted me as disruptive, I thought I was losing everything. And in a way I did. I lost trust. I lost peace. I lost the belief that if you just do the right thing, things will work out. But in that loss, I found something deeper. I found my voice, I found my courage, and I found out just how powerful quiet persistence can be, Ma. It's been 9 months since I walked out of that HR office for the last time. I didn't take the hush money, I didn't sign the NDA, I didn't play the game they expected. I walked away with my recordings, my dignity, and a folder full of evidence they hoped would never see daylight, and that folder changed everything. Ryan's fall wasn't public, but it was absolute. Within weeks, multiple women came forward, stories almost identical to mine. Some whispered, some wrote anonymously, some forwarded emails they had buried in their inboxes out of fear. What I thought was my personal nightmare turned out to be a pattern stretching back years. The company acted shocked, but we weren't. They suspended Ryan first, then reassigned Sandra, then launched an external investigation led by a firm they probably hired for PR purposes more than justice. But even if their motives weren't pure, the result was progress. Policies were rewritten. Reporting procedures changed, leadership reshuffled. Not because they wanted to protect employees like me, because they were forced to ousted. I never went back, not for the job, not for the apology, not for the money, because by then I understood something I hadn't before. Returning to a place that only respects you after they fear you isn't a win. It's just survival in a fancier package, so I chose better. I joined a smaller company led by women. People who actually mean it when they say things like open door policy or employee safety. On my first day, my new CEO pulled me aside and said, "I read what you did. I want that kind of integrity on my team." I wanted to cry, not because I needed the validation, but because I'd forgotten what it felt like to be welcomed, not tolerated. Now, I use my experience to help others. I've spoken on panels. Mentored younger women entering male-dominated industries. I even started a blog called Mic On. Because sometimes all it takes is one voice, recorded, remembered, repeated. And the truth, that mic is always louder than the lies. Do I still think about what happened? Yes, I still remember the HR silence. The hallway stairs. The way Ryan smiled as if nothing could ever touch him. And I remember the moment I pressed play on that first recording. The look on their faces when they heard his exact words. The shift in power from assumption to proof. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like justice. So if you're watching this, if you're sitting at your desk second-guessing every email, every breath, every word, I see you. You are not imagining things. You are not being dramatic, and you are not alone. I know what it feels like to be ignored, dismissed, labeled, to walk the line between keeping your job and keeping your soul. But let me tell you what. I wish someone had told me sooner. You don't have to shout to be powerful. You just have to be heard. And if they won't listen, make sure you press record. If you've ever reported harassment or been brushed aside by HR, share your story in the comments. You don't have to say much. Even "I've been there" is enough. Because when we speak up together, our stories become louder than any silence they try to bury us under. And to every woman still wondering if it's worth it, you are not just a voice. You are the proof, and the world needs both.